Welcome, fellow seekers of the ancient light, to another journey through the vast and shadowed chronicles of the 41st millennium. Tonight, as the stars wheel overhead in their eternal dance, we turn our gaze toward one of the most tragic and fearsome legions to ever march beneath the Emperor's banner, and eventually against it. Close your eyes, if you will, and let your mind drift back across the millennia. Back to an age when the galaxy burned with the fires of the Great Crusade, when 20 Primarchs led their sons among the stars, and when hope still flickered in the hearts of humanity. Tonight we speak of the World Eaters, the Red Angel's children, the legion that would become synonymous with rage itself. But before we delve into blood and fury, let us first understand what they once were. For every tale of darkness must begin with light, and every tragedy with hope. The World Eaters were not always the chain-axe-wielding berserkers that history remembers. They were not always slaves to the blood god's whispers. Once they were noble warriors, defenders of humanity's dream of unity among the stars. In the quiet moments before dawn, when the universe holds its breath between night and day, we can still hear the echoes of what they might have been. The 12th Legion, the Warhounds, children of a Primarch who valued honor above all else, even as the galaxy conspired to twist that honor into something unrecognizable. Picture, if you will, the pristine laboratories of terror in those early days of the Great Crusade. Geneticists and warrior scholars labored tirelessly, crafting the genetic templates that would birth the Space Marine legions. Each legion was designed with purpose, each given gifts that would serve the Emperor's grand vision. The gene seed that would become the World Eaters carried within it the capacity for unwavering loyalty, unbreakable brotherhood, and a fury that could be channeled in the service of righteousness. The sacred halls of the Imperial Palace echoed with the footsteps of these early warhounds, their armor pristine white and blue, their hearts filled with the fire of purpose. They were not the largest of the legions, nor the most numerous, but they possessed something that set them apart, an intensity of spirit that burned like a flame in the darkness. When they fought with the passion of those who truly believed in the cause they served. Yet even in those early days, there were whispers, legends spoken in hushed tones of a lost son, a Primarch scattered to the stars like his brothers during the dark days of the scattering. Somewhere among the countless worlds of the galaxy, a child of the Emperor walked beneath alien skies, growing to manhood far from terror's guiding light. His name would become legend, and eventually curse Angron, the Red Angel, the broken Primarch. As we settle deeper into our tale tonight, consider the nature of fate and choice. Were the World Eaters destined for darkness from their very creation, their gene seed carrying some flaw that would inevitably lead them to ruin? Or were they shaped by circumstances, by the cruel hand of a galaxy that takes noble hearts and twists them into something monstrous? Perhaps the truth lies somewhere between destiny and decision, in that shadowed space where even the wisest cannot clearly see. The Great Crusade was humanity's golden dream made manifest, a time when the species reached out with both hands to grasp the stars themselves. Thousands of worlds had been brought into compliance, billions of souls united under the imperial truth. The legions Astartes were the Emperor's chosen instruments in this grand work, each crafted for specific purposes in the great tapestry of conquest and unity. Among these legions, the Warhounds held a special place. They were the shock troops, the ones called upon when the enemy's resistance seemed unbreakable. Their tactics were direct, their approach uncompromising. Where diplomacy failed and other methods proved insufficient, the Warhounds would be unleashed, their white and blue armor gleaming as they carved through enemy lines with methodical precision. But it was not mere brutality that defined them in those days. No, the Warhounds possessed a code of honor that ran deeper than their genetic programming. They valued courage above cunning, loyalty above personal glory. In their Terran training grounds, young neophytes learned not just the arts of war, but the importance of brotherhood, of standing shield to shield with their battle brothers even unto death. Imagine In the quiet of this night, those ancient battlefields where the warhounds first proved their worth, the acrid smell of weapon discharge, mixing with the metallic tang of spilled blood, the steady rhythm of bolter fire creating a deadly symphony across alien landscapes, and through it all the war cries of the 12th Legion, voices raised not in mindless fury, but in disciplined determination to see the Emperor's will done. Yet even as they conquered world after world in the Emperor's name, fate was weaving the threads that would lead to their undoing. For on a distant world, in gladiatorial pits beneath foreign stars, their Primarch was learning lessons that would echo through eternity. Angron was discovering what it meant to fight not for glory or righteousness, but for the simple right to draw another breath. He was learning that sometimes the only freedom to be found is in the space between one heartbeat and the next. When the crowd roars for blood, and death seems like the only honest companion in a dishonest galaxy, the irony was profound, though none could see it at the time. While the warhounds fought with honor among the stars, believing in the righteousness of their cause, their lost father was being stripped of everything that might have made him whole. Where they learned brotherhood, he learned solitude. Where they found purpose in unity, he found meaning only in survival. The divergent paths they walked would eventually converge in ways that would shake the very foundations of the Imperium. In the gentle darkness that surrounds us now, we can reflect on these parallel journeys without the heat of battle or the pressure of immediate choice. The warhounds and their scattered Primarch, each shaped by their experiences, each carrying within them the seeds of what they would become. There is a kind of terrible poetry in how their separate paths wound toward the same destination, even as neither could see the ending that awaited them. The galaxy is vast beyond imagining, filled with countless worlds and infinite possibilities. Yet somehow in all that immensity, the threads of fate draw together with an almost supernatural precision. The warhounds continued their campaigns, their reputation growing with each victory, each world brought into compliance. They were proud of their record, proud of their service to humanity's greatest dream. They could not know that their greatest triumph and their most terrible failure were intrinsically linked, separated only by time and the cruel machinations of gods both false and all too real. And so our tale begins, not with the roar of chain axes or the spray of arterial blood, but with hope, with the quiet dignity of warriors who believed in something greater than themselves, with the gentle tragedy of a father and sons who would find each other at exactly the wrong moment in history, when love and loyalty would become the very instruments of their mutual destruction. As we pause here in our telling, let the weight of what is to come settle softly around you like a comfortable blanket. Rest easy knowing that we shall continue this journey together, exploring the paths that led from honor to horror, from brotherhood to betrayal. The warhounds await us still, frozen in that moment before they learned their father's name, before they understood the price of reunion, before they discovered that sometimes the greatest tragedy is not death, but transformation. Until we meet again in the next part of our tale, sleep well and dream of warriors who once believed the galaxy could be saved. Welcome back, gentle listeners, to our continuing journey through the shadows of the 31st millennium. As the cosmic winds carry us deeper into the tale of the World Eaters, we find ourselves standing at the threshold of understanding, ready to witness the birth of legends and the forging of destinies that would echo through 10,000 years of darkness. Let us return now to those distant days when the Great Crusade was still young, when the Emperor's vision of unity burned bright across 1,000,000 worlds, and when the warhounds first began to carve their legacy among the stars. Picture the training grounds of terror, where young aspirants underwent the sacred transformation that would make them into angels of death. These were not mere mortals being elevated to superhuman status, but the finest specimens of humanity being reborn as living weapons in service of mankind's greatest dream, the gene laboratories. Beneath the Imperial Palace hummed with quiet efficiency as the 12th Legion's neophytes underwent their trials. Each candidate had been chosen not merely for physical prowess, but for their unwavering determination, their capacity for brotherhood, and their ability to channel righteous fury in service of a greater cause. The process was lengthy, painful, and many did not survive. But those who emerged bore within their enhanced bodies the genetic legacy of a Primarch they had never met. Captain Khan was among the first generation of warhounds to draw breath in those hallowed halls. Even then, before the name Khan the Betrayer would become a curse whispered in the darkness, he embodied everything noble about the Legion. His loyalty was absolute, his courage unquestionable, and his devotion to his battle brothers ran deeper than the marrow in his bones. When he spoke of honor, grown warriors listened. When he led from the front, even the most hardened veterans followed without question. The early campaigns of the Warhounds read like poetry written in fire and steel. They fought alongside the Lunar Wolves on the killing fields of murder, where alien horrors sought to devour human flesh and corrupt human souls. They stood shoulder to shoulder with the Imperial Fists during the siege of Fortress Worlds, whose names have been lost to time, but whose liberation marked crucial victories in humanity's expansion. Each battle tested them, refined them, forged them into an instrument of such perfect lethality that even their brother legions regarded them with respectful awe. Yet for all their victories, for all their growing reputation as warriors without peer in close combat, there remained an emptiness at the heart of the Legion. They were sons without a father, children who had inherited strength and purpose, but lacked the guiding presence that gave other legions their unique character. The Ultramarines had their Lord Guilliman's wisdom. The Imperial Fists had Dawn's unbreakable resolve. The Blood Angels had Sanguinius's noble grace. The Warhounds had only each other, and the growing certainty that somewhere among the stars, their Gene Father walked alone. Meanwhile, on a world whose name would become synonymous with suffering, that Gene Father was learning lessons that would reshape the very nature of warfare itself. New Syria was a world of contradictions, a planet where advanced technology coexisted with the most primitive forms of entertainment. The ruling elite had grown soft and decadent, finding their thrills in the gladiatorial games that pitted slave against slave, in contests where death was the only honest outcome. Into this world of artificial suns and underground killing fields, a star fell from the heavens. The child within that fallen star possessed strength beyond mortal comprehension, intelligence that could grasp the most complex strategies in moments, and a capacity for both love and rage that would have staggered lesser beings. But he was still just a child, and children, even godlike ones, are shaped by the hands that raise them. The High Riders of New Syria found the boy and saw not a lost son of the Emperor, but a potential asset to their blood-soaked entertainments. They named him Angron, and they began the process of breaking him down and rebuilding him as a thing of pure aggression. The Butcher's Nails, those archaeotech implants that would become the bane of the 12th Legion's existence, were forced into his skull while he was still young enough for the neural pathways to adapt around them. Imagine, if you will, what it must have been like for a being designed to feel the full spectrum of human emotion, to love and protect and nurture, to have those capabilities slowly burned away by devices that rewarded only anger and violence. Every moment of calm brought pain. Every instant of peace was agony. Only in the heat of battle, only in the moment when blood flowed and lives ended, could Angron find any relief from the constant torment that had become his existence. But even broken, even twisted by forces beyond his control, Angron retained something of what he had been meant to be. In the slave pits beneath New Syria's greatest arena, he found others like himself, not demigods, but mortals who had been ground down by the same system that had claimed him. Slowly, carefully, he began to forge them into something more than mere gladiators. He taught them to fight not just as individuals seeking personal survival, but as a unified force capable of achieving what none could accomplish alone. The gladiator rebellion that followed was unlike anything New Syria had ever seen. Where previous uprisings had been desperate, chaotic affairs that burned bright and died quickly, Angron's war was methodical, purposeful, and terrifyingly effective. His followers called themselves the Eaters of Cities, for they devoured everything the High Riders sent against them. What began as a simple escape attempt evolved into a full-scale revolution that threatened to topple the planet's entire social order. For years, the war raged across Nuceria's surface. Angron led his people from victory to victory, each battle cementing his legend and proving that even the mightiest chains could be broken by those willing to pay the price in blood. He was no longer just a gladiator fighting for survival, but a liberator, fighting for the freedom of all who suffered under the High Rider's tyranny. In those moments, despite the agony of the nails, despite the constant pressure to sink into mindless rage, Angron was everything a Primarch should be. A beacon of hope for the oppressed, a champion of the downtrodden, a figure around whom the powerless could rally and find strength. Yet even as Angron fought his war of liberation on distant Nuceria, his sons continued their own campaigns among the stars. The Warhounds had been assigned to compliance actions on the galaxy's outer rim, worlds where humanity had regressed to feudal states or been corrupted by alien influence. These were not glorious campaigns fought against worthy foes, but grinding wars of attrition where progress was measured in miles of blood-soaked earth and cities reduced to rubble. It was during the campaign on Genna that the Warhounds first began to change. The enemy they faced there was unlike anything they had encountered before. A Xenos race that seemed to feed on pain and terror, that fought not to win, but to inflict maximum suffering on their foes. Traditional tactics proved inadequate against an enemy that welcomed death as long as they could drag their killers down with them. Gradually, almost imperceptibly, the Warhounds began to adapt, to match their foes' brutality with brutality of their own. Captain Khan led the final assault on Genna's capital, and witnesses would later speak of the change they saw in him that day. The careful discipline that had always marked his leadership gave way to something raw, more primal. He fought not with the controlled aggression of a space marine, but with the savage joy of a warrior who had finally found his true calling. When the city fell and the last of the Xenos lay dead, Khan stood among the ruins with blood on his hands and something new burning in his eyes. The transformation was subtle, so gradual that none recognized it at the time. The Warhounds were simply becoming more effective, more feared, more willing to embrace whatever methods were necessary to achieve victory. Their casualties decreased, even as their reputation for brutality grew. Other legions began to whisper about the 12th Legion's methods, but none could argue with their results. And still on Nuceria, Angron's rebellion burned toward its inevitable conclusion. The High Riders had exhausted their conventional forces and called upon off-world mercenaries, alien allies, and finally the most desperate measure of all. Atomic weapons turned against their own cities to deny them to the rebels. The war that had begun as a gladiator's quest for freedom had become something larger, something that threatened to consume the entire world. In the end, it came down to a single battle on a mountain plateau, where Angron and the last of his followers made their stand against overwhelming odds. They were outnumbered 1,000 to 1, facing certain death, but they faced it together. In that moment, as the final battle began, Angron was perhaps as close to his intended nature as he would ever be, a leader willing to die for those he had sworn to protect, a father to the dispossessed, a beacon of hope in humanity's darkest hour. The ending, when it came, was both tragedy and miracle intertwined. Just as the final assault began, just as Angron prepared to make his last stand alongside his brothers and sisters in chains, the sky tore open in fire. The Emperor himself descended from the heavens, accompanied by his retinue of golden warriors, and in a display of power that defied comprehension, he ended the battle in moments. But the price of that salvation was higher than anyone could have imagined. The Emperor could save Angron, but he could not save the gladiator warriors who had followed him. They died on that mountain, every last one of them, while their leader was teleported away to safety and a destiny he never wanted. In trying to preserve one son, the master of mankind had destroyed everything that son held dear. And so ends this portion of our tale, with a reunion that was both blessing and curse, with a father's love that felt like the cruelest abandonment, and with the first seeds of a tragedy that would reshape the galaxy planted in soil watered with the blood of heroes and slaves alike. Rest now, knowing that we shall return soon to continue this story of love and loss, of loyalty tested beyond endurance, and of the terrible price paid when gods interfere in the affairs of mortals. Sleep peacefully and dream of mountain plateaus where freedom died, so that duty might be born. The quiet of the void surrounds us once more as we return to the chronicles of the 12th Legion, to that pivotal moment when father and sons were finally united, yet never truly together. Take a slow breath, dear listener, and let your mind drift back to those fateful days when the Emperor's great crusade reached its zenith, when the galaxy seemed poised on the edge of unity, and when the seeds of the greatest betrayal in human history began to sprout in the fertile ground of resentment and pain. The reunion between Angron and his warhounds should have been a moment of triumph, a celebration of bonds that transcended flesh and blood. For generations, the Legion had fought without their Primarch, excelling in every campaign yet always feeling incomplete, like a weapon forged without its proper grip. Now at last they would meet their Gene Father, the source of their strength, the living embodiment of everything they aspired to become. But the being who stepped aboard their flagship was not the noble warrior king they had dreamed of finding. Angron was a broken creature, his skull scarred by crude surgical scars, his eyes holding depths of pain that no mortal could fully comprehend. The butcher's nails had been eating away at his brain for decades, each day bringing him closer to complete neural collapse, each moment of peace, an agony that could only be relieved through violence and bloodshed. The first meeting between Primarch and Legion was a disaster of misunderstanding and bitter disappointment. The Warhounds had expected to find a father who would embrace them, guide them, teach them the deeper mysteries of warfare and brotherhood. Instead, they found a tortured demigod who looked upon them with something approaching contempt, who saw in their clean armor and proud bearing everything he had been denied, everything he had lost on that blood-soaked mountain on Nuceria. Captain Khan, ever the diplomat, attempted to bridge the growing chasm between Primarch and Legion. He spoke of the Warhounds' victories, their dedication to the Emperor's cause, their eagerness to fight at their father's side. But Angron heard only the words of sons who had never known true suffering, who had never felt the bite of chains, or fought for the simple right to exist. To him they were not battle brothers, but strangers wearing his face, pale reflections of the true warriors who had died defending freedom while he was whisked away to safety. The transformation of the Warhounds into the World Eaters began slowly, like a poison working its way through healthy tissue. Angron renamed his legion, choosing a title that reflected not nobility or purpose, but simple raw consumption. They would be eaters of worlds, devourers of civilizations, creatures whose only function was to consume and destroy. The elegant white and blue heraldry of the Warhounds was replaced with the crimson and brass that would become synonymous with slaughter. But it was not merely aesthetic changes that marked this transformation. Angron began to demand that his sons undergo the same surgical modifications that had ruined his own mind. The butcher's nails, he insisted, were not a curse but a gift, a way of achieving the perfect warrior state where doubt and mercy were burned away, leaving only the pure flame of controlled aggression. The Legion's apothecaries protested, warning that the archaeotech implants were incompatible with Astartes' physiology, that they would cause irreversible brain damage and eventual death. Angron listened to their protests with the patience of a father hearing a child's complaints about necessary medicine. He had lived with the nails for decades, had learned to function despite the constant agony they caused, and had achieved victories that proved their worth. His sons would be stronger for sharing his burden, more effective for embracing the same modifications that had made him the ultimate gladiator. Those who refused the implants were not cast out, but they were marked as lesser, as incomplete warriors who lacked the commitment to achieve true perfection. The first volunteers came forward within days of Angron's announcement. Some were motivated by genuine desire to please their Primarch, others by ambition or curiosity about the modification's effects. Khan was among the earliest to undergo the procedure. Despite his misgivings about its necessity, he emerged from the surgical chamber, changed in ways both subtle and profound, his legendary tactical acumen intact, but overlaid with a new hunger for close combat, a need to be in the thick of battle where blood flowed and lives ended. The compliance of Genna Prime became the World Eaters' first campaign under their new name and nature. The planet was a fortress world that had declared independence from the Imperium, its rulers convinced that they could resist the Great Crusade through superior technology and defensive preparations. They had built cities that were fortresses, populations that were armies, and weapons designed to make any invasion impossibly costly. Under their old leadership, the Warhounds might have approached such a world with careful planning, systematic siege warfare, and methodical reduction of defensive positions. The World Eaters had no patience for such niceties. They fell upon Genna Prime like a red tide, their assault boats hitting the planet's surface at dozens of points simultaneously. Each strike force led by warriors whose only tactical consideration was how quickly they could close with the enemy. The defenders fought bravely, as doomed warriors often do. Their energy barriers held for hours under the World Eaters' assault, their automated defense systems claiming hundreds of lives, their disciplined fire taking a steady toll on the attackers. But against an enemy that welcomed wounds as proof of commitment, that treated death not as defeat, but as the ultimate expression of warrior spirit. Conventional defenses proved inadequate. Khan led the assault on the planetary capital, his chain axe singing its song of destruction as he carved through defenders who had never faced anything like the World Eaters' focused fury. Behind him came his warriors, their own weapons adding to the chorus of violence, their war cries echoing from the city's walls as they embraced the joy of battle that the Nails had awakened in their minds. The city fell in a single day, its walls breached not through clever engineering, but through the simple application of overwhelming aggression. Yet even in victory, there were those among the World Eaters who felt a growing unease about their legion's direction. Veteran sergeants who remembered the Warhounds' more disciplined approach to warfare began to question whether their new methods, however effective, were truly an improvement. They watched their nailed brothers with growing concern, noting the subtle changes in their behavior, the gradual erosion of the tactical flexibility that had once made the Legion feared throughout the galaxy. These concerns reached their peak during the campaign against the Oretian technocracy, a collection of forge worlds that had embraced mechanical augmentation to an extent that horrified even the Mechanicum of Mars. The technocrats had replaced so much of their biological matter with machinery that they barely qualified as human, and their weapons reflected their cybernetic nature, precise, efficient, and utterly without mercy. The World Eaters' assault on the technocracy's primary world, Horus Prime, became a grinding siege that lasted for months. The defenders' mechanical precision proved a perfect counter to the attackers' chaotic fury. Their automated defenses requiring no rest or reinforcement, their robotic soldiers feeling no fear or doubt that could be exploited. For perhaps the first time since their reunion with Angron, the World Eaters found themselves stalled, their preferred tactics proving inadequate against an enemy that matched their dedication to warfare, while exceeding their technological capabilities. It was during this siege that the first signs of the Nail's ultimate cost became apparent. Warriors who had been the epitome of Astartes' discipline began to show signs of neural degradation, their speech becoming slurred, their tactical reasoning compromised by increasing inability to think beyond the immediate need for violence. The Legion's apothecaries worked frantically to find some treatment for the condition, but the archaeotech was beyond their understanding, its effects irreversible once the initial modification had been made. Captain Erlen, one of the few company commanders to resist the Nails, attempted to bring these concerns to Angron's attention during a strategic planning session. He spoke carefully, respectfully of the need to preserve the Legion's long-term effectiveness, of the wisdom of maintaining some warriors in their unmodified state as a tactical reserve. His words were measured, his loyalty unquestioned, his logic unassailable. Angron's response was swift and brutal. The Primarch's own Nails had been triggered by what he perceived as criticism of his leadership, and in the space between one heartbeat and the next, he had crossed the chamber and lifted Erlen off his feet with one massive hand wrapped around the captain's throat. For long moments the two regarded each other in silence, father and son locked in a tableau that captured everything wrong with their relationship. When Angron finally released his grip, Erlen fell to his knees gasping but unbroken. The Primarch turned away without another word, dismissing not just the captain, but the concerns he had raised. From that day forward, no one in the Legion dared to question the wisdom of the Nails or their ultimate effects on the warriors who bore them. The siege of Aureus Prime finally ended, not through tactical brilliance or overwhelming force, but through the simple application of World Eater stubbornness. Day after day, month after month, they threw themselves against the technocrats' defenses, accepting casualties that would have caused other legions to reconsider their approach. Eventually, even mechanical precision could not compensate for the sheer attrition of facing an enemy that would never retreat, never surrender, never consider any option except total victory or total destruction. When the final technocrat stronghold fell, it was to warriors who had been fighting continuously for 72 hours, whose armor was so covered in blood and oil that their original colors were impossible to discern. They had won, but the victory felt hollow to those few who retained enough clarity to question its cost. The World Eaters had achieved compliance, but they had done so by becoming something that their former selves would have struggled to recognize. News of other campaigns reached them as they departed the Oresian system. The Blood Angels had brought a dozen worlds into compliance through a combination of diplomacy and surgical strikes. The Ultramarines had established functional governments on their conquered worlds, leaving behind infrastructure and institutions that would serve the Imperium for centuries to come. The Imperial Fists had built fortress monasteries that would anchor Imperial authority in their assigned sectors. The World Eaters left behind only ruins and the memory of violence so complete that entire populations would take generations to recover from the trauma. They had become efficient killers, but they had lost something essential in the process: the ability to build as well as destroy, to preserve as well as conquer, to see victory as something more than simply the moment when all enemies lay dead. And through it all, Angron watched his son's transformation with satisfaction, tinged by an emotion he could no longer name. They were becoming what he had always been: perfect instruments of war, beings whose existence was justified only by their capacity for violence. The gentle warriors who had once dreamed of honor and brotherhood were dying, replaced by creatures whose only loyalty was to the next battle, the next enemy, the next opportunity to feed the growing hunger that the nails had awakened in their minds. Yet in the quiet moments between campaigns, when the pain of the implants subsided enough to allow something approaching clarity, Angron sometimes wondered if this was truly what his sons deserved. He remembered his gladiator brothers, warriors who had chosen to die free rather than live as slaves, and he could not shake the feeling that in saving his legion from weakness, he had enslaved them to something far worse than any chains forged by mortal hands. But such thoughts were dangerous, and the nails had taught him to avoid danger. Better to focus on the next world, the next enemy, the next opportunity to prove that the World Eaters were exactly what the galaxy needed them to be. The transformation was complete, irreversible, and ultimately necessary. Or so he told himself, as the stars wheeled overhead and the Great Crusade continued its march toward an ending that none of them could yet imagine. Rest now, gentle listener, and let these visions of transformation fade into peaceful dreams. We shall return soon to follow the World Eaters as they march toward their ultimate destiny, toward choices that will echo through eternity and betrayals that will reshape the very nature of reality itself. We return now to the final chapters of our tale, dear listeners, as the galaxy stands poised on the precipice of its greatest tragedy. The winds of change blow through the void, carrying whispers of rebellion and the scent of betrayal, while the World Eaters march ever deeper into the darkness that will consume them. Let your breathing slow and your thoughts drift as we witness the events that would shatter the Imperium and damn a legion to an eternity of rage. The Horus Heresy began not with grand declarations or formal ceremonies, but with quiet conversations in shadowed chambers, with promises made to desperate souls, and with the slow corruption of hearts that had once burned bright with loyalty. When the Warmaster Horus fell to chaos on the moon of Davin, the seeds of galactic civil war were planted in soil already prepared by decades of growing discontent among the Primarchs and their legions. Angron felt the call of the dark gods like a song in his blood, a melody that harmonized perfectly with the constant symphony of pain that the butcher's nails played in his skull. Here at last was a cause that made sense to him, a rebellion against the Emperor who had condemned his gladiator brothers to death while saving only him. The blood god Khorne whispered sweet promises of eternal warfare, of a galaxy where strength was the only virtue and violence the only truth worth knowing. The decision to join Horus was not a difficult one for the World Eaters. They had already grown distant from their fellow legions, their methods too brutal, their hunger for battle too consuming for them to find common ground with warriors who still spoke of honor and restraint. When the War Master's emissaries came to them with offers of alliance, they found a legion already primed for rebellion, warriors whose loyalty to the Emperor had been eroded by years of watching their Primarchs' barely contained hatred for his creator. Yet not all of the World Eaters embraced treachery with equal enthusiasm. Captain Erlen, still bearing the scars of his last confrontation with Angron, gathered those battle brothers who remained unmodified by the nails, those who still remembered what it meant to fight for something greater than the simple joy of killing. In secret councils held in the deepest parts of their flagship, these loyal souls debated their options, weighing duty against survival, honor against the growing madness that consumed their legion. The purge, when it came, was swift and merciless. Angron had grown tired of dissent within his ranks, weary of voices that spoke of restraint when the galaxy was calling out for conquest. In a single night of violence that would be remembered as the Night of the Wolf within Legion records, the World Eaters turned upon their own, nailed warriors hunting down their unmodified brothers with the same enthusiasm they had once reserved for the Emperor's enemies. Captain Erlen made his last stand in the Legion's chapel, surrounded by a handful of battle brothers who had chosen to die as loyal servants of the Emperor, rather than live as traitors to everything they had once believed. They fought with the desperate courage of the doomed, their bolters singing defiance even as the red tide of their corrupted brothers closed around them. In the end, they were overwhelmed not by superior tactics or greater skill, but by simple numbers and the unbreakable determination of warriors who no longer feared death because they had already lost everything worth living for. The World Eaters who emerged from that night of purging were a different breed entirely from the Warhounds, who had once served with distinction in the Great Crusade. They were creatures of pure aggression, beings whose only remaining loyalty was to their Primarch and to the intoxicating promise of eternal war that Khorne had whispered into their minds. The last vestiges of discipline and tactical flexibility had been burned away, leaving only the hunger for battle and the need to spill blood in ever greater quantities. Their first campaign as declared traitors took them to the Istvan system, where Horus had orchestrated a trap of devastating elegance. Loyal legions had been sent to put down what they believed was a localized rebellion, unaware that they were walking into the killing ground where the heresy would truly begin. The World Eaters fought alongside their new allies in the Iron Warriors, the Night Lords and the Alpha Legion, but they fought as they had never fought before, with a savage joy that horrified even their fellow traitors. The Drop Site Massacre became a symphony of slaughter orchestrated by the World Eaters' particular genius for close combat. They fell upon the loyal Space Marines with chain axes screaming, their war cries echoing across the volcanic plains as they carved through formations that had expected to fight rebels, not brothers consumed by an alien madness. Captain Khan led the assault against the Salamander's positions, his legendary tactical skills now focused entirely on maximizing carnage rather than achieving strategic objectives. In the chaos of Istvan Fiv, something fundamental changed within the World Eaters' ranks. The blood they spilled was not just the red life fluid of their enemies, but something more precious and terrible, the essence of brotherhood itself, the bonds that had once united all Space Marines as sons of the Emperor. With each loyal warrior they slew, they severed another connection to their former selves, until only the nails and their hunger remained. Angron fought like a creature possessed during those dark days, his massive frame cutting through enemy formations with the efficiency of a reaping machine. But those who observed him closely noted changes that went beyond mere combat prowess. His skin had begun to take on a reddish hue, his muscles had swollen beyond even Primarch proportions, and his eyes burned with fires that had never been lit by purely mortal rage. The Blood God's gifts were beginning to manifest in their chosen champion, transforming him from a broken demigod into something that transcended the merely physical. The heresy years that followed were a blur of campaigns and battles that blended together in an endless cycle of violence and destruction. The World Eaters fought at the Siege of Kalth, where they turned an ultramarine stronghold into a charnel house. They participated in the burning of Prospero, adding their fury to the Space Wolves' methodical destruction of the Thousand Suns. They carved their way through the Thrammer's crusade, leaving a trail of devastated worlds that would take centuries to recover from their passage. Yet with each victory, with each world brought to ruin, the World Eaters found themselves changing in ways that even they could not fully comprehend. The Butcher's nails, originally crude mechanical devices, began to merge with their flesh in ways that defied understanding. What had once been simple neural implants became conduits for the Blood God's influence, channels through which Khorne's power could flow directly into the minds and souls of his chosen warriors. The transformation was not merely physical but spiritual. As the World Eaters gradually lost their capacity for any emotion except rage, they could no longer feel joy except in battle, could no longer experience satisfaction except through the act of killing, could no longer find peace except in the moments between one fight and the next. They had become perfect servants of their god, but in doing so, they had ceased to be recognizably human. Captain Khan's own transformation became a source of legend among the traitor forces. The warrior who had once been known for his diplomatic skills and tactical genius gradually evolved into something that his former self would have considered a monster. The nails ate away at his higher brain functions, replacing strategic thinking with an intuitive understanding of violence, substituting emotional intelligence with an unerring instinct for finding an enemy's weakness. Yet perhaps the most tragic aspect of the World Eaters' fall was not their transformation into monsters, but their retention of just enough awareness to understand what they had lost. In rare moments of clarity, when the nails' influence temporarily subsided, individual warriors would sometimes remember what it had felt like to fight for honor rather than bloodshed, to protect the innocent rather than simply slaughter everything in sight. These glimpses of their former selves were perhaps the cruelest torture of all. Brief reminders of the nobility they had traded away for the promise of eternal war. The Siege of Terror marked the final stages of the World Eaters' metamorphosis from space marines into something altogether more terrible. As Horus's forces closed around the Emperor's palace, Angren himself underwent the ultimate transformation, ascending to become a demon Primarch of Khorne through rituals so bloody and terrible that even his own warriors turned away in horror. The Red Angel became something that existed as much in the warp as in reality, a creature of pure aggression, whose very presence could drive mortals mad with rage. When the siege finally ended with Horus's death and the traitor forces in full retreat, the World Eaters found themselves cast adrift in a galaxy that no longer had any place for them. They were too far gone to seek redemption, too consumed by their hunger for battle to simply fade away into obscurity. Instead, they fragmented into countless warbands, each following their own path of destruction across the stars, united only by their shared devotion to the Blood God and their eternal need to spill blood in his name. The long war that followed the heresy became the World Eaters' natural habitat, an endless conflict where they could indulge their appetites without restraint or consideration for consequences. They fought anyone and everyone, Imperial forces, other Chaos warbands, alien species, and even each other when no other enemies could be found. They had become a force of nature rather than an army, a plague of violence that spread wherever they traveled. Through it all, the surviving World Eaters retained just enough of their former identity to understand the magnitude of their fall. They remembered being warhounds, recalled what it had felt like to fight for the Emperor's dream of unity, could still sometimes hear the echoes of the oaths they had sworn in their youth. But these memories served only to fuel their rage, to remind them of everything they had lost and could never reclaim. In the 10,000 years since the heresy, the World Eaters have become perhaps the most feared of all the traitor legions, not because they are the strongest or the most cunning, but because they represent